The guideline has a lot of information on some unique considerations. So from an evaluation standpoint, I start most evaluations, if not all evaluations, with talking to the parents or just observing the child to come from a perspective of strength and preference, to get to know the child, to get to know the adult individual, what his interests are, what is motivating to them, so that we can build those factors directly into the evaluation. There are multiple setting and context considerations. So what I do in an outpatient clinic is very different than what I do in the school. Whether I'm functioning on an interprofessional team versus functioning independently alone are also very different. Lots of information on behavior regulation factors. So there's a lot of evidence to support these antecedent-based interventions are trying to prevent behavior dysregulation in children. And so there's a lot of evidence and information described about using visual supports, using schedules, using other self-management kind of techniques to help regulate behavior so that we can focus on participation. We also want to highlight the real important role of the family. If we look at evaluation results and how we interpret them and plan intervention, from an OT perspective, there are a lot of factors that I think transcend not only OT but other providers. We need to consider what participation looks like. So what is the individual doing? How are they doing it? And how meaningful is that to them as we look at the occupational profile? In that context, what are the demands? The demands of working in a bright light store, if we're going to stock shelves, is very different that maybe if we're in a warehouse environment and have headphones on. So trying to consider all of those contextual factors and demands of the task up front really help us with intervention planning. I always want to take the opportunity to mention self-determination and advocacy. Whenever we're doing intervention planning, these goals and interventions should be self-determined, so the individual should determine what those what goal areas are going to be. I'm a firm believer in developing and fostering those strengths, so using those strengths as part of the intervention and embedding those within the intervention and in context. Transitions in general are difficult for individuals with conditions. So transitions from Part C to Part B, transitions out of Part B. For individuals with autism, it's especially difficult. Transitions, those other transitions that we may see as trivial are even more difficult. So transitioning to a different food, a different plate, sometimes yield a strong response. So we need to really be mindful of transitions and doing a lot of extra planning when they're coming up. I think it's also important to use the other evidence. And there are multiple guidelines out there. And I like to kind of crosswalk interventions to goal areas. Hopefully everyone is familiar with National Standards Project from the National Autism Center and the National Professional Development Centers on Autism Spectrum Disorder. So the National Professional Development Centers on Autism Spectrum Disorder targets focused interventions. And so those interventions are more specific strategies to address an area, whereas the National Standards Project looks at packages, like a behavioral package. If you look at that first row, the National Standards Project talks about behavioral interventions, and the National Professional Development Centers on ASD, you can see there are a number of interventions, focused interventions, that fall within that package, like differential reinforcement, like antecedent-based interventions, prompting, reinforcement, task analysis, all the things that we use just about every day. We may not know we're doing it, but just about every day, if we're working with individuals on the autism spectrum, we're using those interventions. So really what I like to do is crosswalk those interventions with outcome areas or goal areas addressed. And so if you look at schedules and visual supports, if I'm working with an individual and I'm trying to build or improve their ability to attend and focus, we can see that visual supports and schedules are an evidence-based intervention for that behavior, for addressing behavior, as it is for communication and social skill. Okay. And so using the evidence and using evidence from a number of areas, we can crosswalk to make sure that the interventions we're using are evidence-based. I think it also kind of gives us a unified language. If there's one thing that's difficult in working on interprofessional teams with autism, we're talking about similar things often, but we're just using different words. And so using a similar language in a construct like this or a crosswalk really helps us move those things forward. We're going to go through these case applications pretty quick. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I want to leave some time at the end for you all to ask some questions. So if we look at case applications and look at Javier, 5-year-old little guy, diagnosed at 30 months, has some single words, 10 to 15 words, receiving speech, just the picture exchange communication system is being implemented, and he's starting kindergarten. And so we're looking at occupational therapy for him, more of in a consultative role, as we're developing an IEP. So how do we move forward? We look at an evaluation, we do some structured clinical observations, trying to look at attention, behavior regulation factors, social communication, play. And Javier's teacher is most concerned about his behavior regulation in the classroom. So he's not as engaged. His interaction with peers is reduced. He has a hard time hanging in for circle time and table activities and needs a lot of prompting to get tasks complete. When you observe Javier play in social participation on the playground, he's not interacting with peers. Instead, he really likes running along the fence and throwing mulch in the air and running through it. And so that's how he likes to spend his time at recess. So, I think rather than describing that as unusual visual inspection or repetitive behavior, here we're describing what we observed and what we saw, and trying to take a look at what that tells us about Javier. So does he like that visual input? Does he like the movement with the vision? The tactile input as he's running through the mulch, as it's bouncing off him. So how do we, how can we use our observations there? If we look at school factor 1 of the sensory profile 2, indicated that he's going to need external support. So he's going to need external help to help regulate his attention and focus and behavior in the classroom. And if we look at sensory factor 2, there's differences in his awareness and attention. And they're going to impact his ability to focus in that learning environment. Board certified behavior analyst was also consulted to really look at functional behavioral assessment of task performance. So why is Javier running away from the table? Why is he getting up from circle time? Trying to do a more systematic functional behavioral assessment to look at some of those areas. So from an intervention planning standpoint, we wanted to also contact mom to figure out what we're seeing in school is pretty consistent with what's going on at home. She described, most of the things are pretty similar. She also noted that he liked Dora the Explorer. She said that there's it's a bilingual home, so some of the Spanish that's spoke at the home really perks him up when he hears it on TV. And so we have another interest now we can really target for Javier. So on the basis of those sensory factor findings and that functional behavioral analysis, we really target some antecedent interventions, positive behavior support kinds of interventions to hit those participation, social communication, and play areas that were the goal. And so again, the references here are the evidence. And so these are individual evidence articles, whether they be systematic reviews or randomized controlled trials that can be used to support your evidence, support your choice of this intervention. So for Javier, we used PECS to really expand that functional communication and build visual supports into the classroom. We had activities in context that were adapted. So we used some of these activity-based interventions, recognizing his preferences for tactile input, visual input, and needing a lot more input. So preferences for more sensory input. And we used social stories to coach some of the behavioral expectations, especially in challenging behaviors, when we want him to stand in line, when there's a fire drill, some of those factors. Okay. So for Javier, we also did some peer training on the playground to help peers engage. And so we led groups at class, really at recess, around Dora the Explorer, to recognize Javier's special interest and really build that engagement and interaction from a team perspective. And there's ongoing consultation. I think, again, I know we got several folks who are in schools. It's that ongoing consultation that really makes the difference and allows that development of social communication skill, play, and those positive behavior supports then can be floated and progressed into more self-management factors. In contrast, if we look at Jerry, so an adult, Jerry is 22 years old, diagnosed with ASD when he was 19, so much older, and we're hearing more and more of that, adults diagnosed. And Jerry had difficulty holding a job. He's a journalism major. He had won several writing awards during college, graduated early, but he was fired from several jobs. Come late, wanted to write in peace. Things were too loud in the work environment, and so we had some difficulties there. Looked at a number of inventories to kind of get an understanding of what Jerry's goals were. Did a career inventory. Looked at, again, some of these sensory factors, since those appeared to be triggers for a lot of his difficulties with interaction, and did some structured interview to look at those life goals. We, again, focused on Jerry's strengths. He, again, very strong writer, had won awards. We worked with Jerry to really self-advocate. So if things got too loud, we got headphones. We helped him discover self-advocacy steps to talk to his boss about ways in which he could potentially bring in incandescent light, move from a 3-cubicle office to a 2-cubicle office, just some of these strategies, how he can self-advocate for himself. We educated him on doing a sensory scan of the environment, and we used his cell phone to give him a text messages. So again, some of these computer-based, technology-aided self-management supports to remind him to take a break, because he would get so focused on his work, writing and editing, that he wouldn't take a break, and it would be 6 or 7 hours, and then he would just explode. And so we built these triggers to help offer strategies for self-management for him. And we use video modeling of his morning routine, so that these are all the things that need to be done before you leave for work, and leave for work on time. Things like take a shower, put on deodorant, comb your hair, change your clothes. So Jerry's a freelance writer. Works better for him than working full-time in an office with people. The rest of his work is as a copy editor. Copy editing is perfect for him. Focus, look at the literature, look whatever he's reviewing. He's endorsing use of these apps to really help. He's written a couple of columns that have been published in one of the New York Times on using technology with adults with autism. He's invested in some noise-canceling headphones. If anyone's used those, you put them on, it's silent. And so when things get too loud and he has to be in the office and work, he's using those noise-canceling headphones. And he started to look at exercise, recognizing that exercise was one of the common interventions to really help with behavior regulation and stress reduction. Okay. If we look at implications, again, we're going to move through these in like 3 seconds or 4. So we have to target strengths relevant to life roles and consider that person, environment, occupation, interaction, and what are the barriers to participation. We really want to emphasize self-advocacy and self-determination. We want to empower families to build functional independence and adaptive skills. We want to really develop self-monitoring and self-management skills in the individuals themselves. We went through group-based interventions for social skill, many other interventions for communication skill, video modeling and technology-aided interventions to really help with ADL independence and work performance. Lots of interventions that have moderate evidence that we really need to move forward, which tells us that we need to do more studies with occupational therapy as the intervention. Much of our intervention studies are lacking. There's just not a whole lot of evidence to support our use, not enough strong evidence, let's put it that way. So I'm hoping that energizes folks to move those things forward. Hopefully you found that information useful, relevant, and applicable. Let me know if you have questions. We have a few minutes to answer questions. Yvonne is typing, so we will.
My webcam works. If you want to look at it, I haven't started it yet.
Technology. If you think an adult you know may need to be tested, how do you go about seeking resources? In Kentucky, it is, this is one of the areas the Advisory Council on ASD is trying to address, because there just doesn't seem to be enough adult-based resources. There are resources diagnostically for children through community mental health centers. But some of the community mental health centers have available resources to do diagnostic evaluations with adults. They're few and far between, though. I think the other main area from a diagnostic standpoint for adults are adult psychiatry. So I know in the adult psychiatry unit at U of L does. We have a couple of psychologists who do adult-based evaluations as well. They're done very differently. In younger children, we would use more of an interprofessional model with a developmental pediatrician or neurologist and a speech pathologist and a psychologist. In a adult diagnostic evaluation, it's really driven by the psychologist, and the psychologist will see that individual, perform that diagnostic evaluation, and provide that diagnostic clarity for the individual.